Good evening. I'm going to talk to you about what embassy translators do and how they facilitate communication between cultures and countries. During my 24-year career as the in-house translator for the Embassy of Switzerland in Washington, D.C., I worked from German and French into English and edited documents written in English primarily by non-native speakers. That is, by speakers of German, French, and Italian, 3 of the 4 official languages of Switzerland. The 4th official federal language, Romansh, also called Romansh Grijoun, is rarely used at the embassy. However, just in case, I was prepared with my Romansh English Romansh Dictionary and Phrasebook by Manfred Gross and Danielle Telly. In addition to translating and editing for the ambassador of Switzerland to the United States and his administrative staff, I translated and edited for all the sections of the embassy: political and legal, economic and financial, communications, public diplomacy and cultural affairs, consular and administrative, science, technology and higher education, defense, military procurement, and police liaison. What is the mission of a foreign embassy in the U.S.? In a nutshell, it's to represent the home country and defend its interests in the U.S. So, how does an embassy translator help carry out the embassy's mission? The translator is charged with the official translation of a wide range of material, which can include items of an official, political, legal, economic, cultural, scientific, technical, or military nature. For example, reports, speeches, memoranda, legal documents, media releases, diplomatic notes, and cultural and technical documents. In addition to being accurate, each translation must relay the embassy's message so that it is understood across cultures. Based on my 24 years of experience at the Embassy of Switzerland, the following are just a few of the tactics I used to help ensure that all embassy communications with which I was entrusted achieved their desired objectives. One way of achieving a successful translation is through what I call Americanizing, translating and editing embassy documents with a U.S. reader or audience in mind to achieve the desired results or objective. Americanizing documents can also help improve the image of the country the embassy represents in the U.S. As the Swiss Embassy's in-house translator, I did translations into American English of documents written in German and French by Swiss native speakers of those languages. In doing so, I worked with 3 different cultures: Swiss German, Swiss French, and US American. The following are some examples of Americanizing I encountered in my work. First of all, using American English instead of British English spelling and expressions. Since the Swiss are taught British English in school, they write in British English and are not always familiar with the differences between the British and American forms of English. My Swiss colleagues appreciated having their British and uniquely Swiss English transformed into idiomatic American English because it helped them get their point across and make a favorable impression on their American readers, conversation partners, or target audiences. When my Swiss colleagues had specific questions, I found that a dictionary of American English usage could be very helpful in pointing out and confirming the differences between British English and American English spelling and punctuation. Secondly, correcting errors in grammar, spelling, punctuation, word order, and capitalization according to American English usage. In that connection, my Bible at work was the Chicago Manual of Style, published by the University of Chicago Press. Thirdly, Americanizing correspondence through the use of correct titles and forms of address for American officials. It's important, for instance, to know that a senator or representative should be addressed as the Honorable. In that regard, you'll be able to find everything you need in Protocol, the complete handbook of diplomatic, official, and social usage by Mary Jane McCaffrey, Pauline Innes, and Richard M. Sant, Esquire. Over the years, this handbook was an invaluable resource when editing letters to presidents, former presidents, vice presidents, cabinet members, members of Congress, and other high-ranking government officials. The publication is also a handy reference for formal and informal invitations, which are such an integral part of diplomatic life. What else does Americanizing mean to an embassy translator, especially when the job involves translating potentially politically sensitive documents? Americanizing also involves editing for content or meaning. In my job, that entails providing feedback to my Swiss colleagues when they ask for my American reactions to their documents. They were especially interested in knowing if something they had written could be misunderstood or viewed as offensive by an American reader. In translating Swiss documents, Americanizing frequently entails finding appropriate US equivalents for titles and institutions specific to Switzerland. Finding US equivalents for Swiss officials and agencies on the federal level is not particularly difficult. There are excellent resources available, such as Swiss government publications in English and TERNDA, the Swiss government's multilingual terminology database. Even with access to these resources, you still need to watch out for some tricky terms. For example, one tricky title is Staatssekretär in German and Secrétaire d'État in French. The correct English translation is State Secretary. In the Swiss government, a state secretary ranks right below the head of a federal department in 4 departments: the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, Federal Department of Justice and Police, Federal Department of Finance, and Federal Department of Economic Affairs, Education, and Research. There are 7 federal departments in all, each headed by a federal counselor who belongs to the 7-member Federal Council, the executive branch or government. In Switzerland, the government only consists of the executive branch, unlike the US government, which is comprised of 3 branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. A recommended resource for finding the titles of Swiss federal officials and the names of federal government bodies in English is the Swiss Confederation, a Brief Guide, which contains an English description of the organization of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the Swiss Confederation. The guide is also published in German, French, Italian, and Romansh. A very good source of information on the Federal Council and the Swiss administration is the Swiss government's portal at www.admin.ch. In searching for appropriate German translations for titles and institutions specific to the US, I found that the Politisches Wörterbuch zum Regierungssystem der USA, an English-German, German-English political dictionary on the US government by Ulrika Ennis, Patrick Labriola, and Jürgen Schiffer could be useful. Americanizing also constitutes finding appropriate translations for Swiss concepts that don't exist in the US. For example, there is no exact English equivalent for the Swiss term Heimatort because the concept simply doesn't exist in the US. Although the term is usually translated into English as place of origin, hardly anyone in the US knows what a Swiss place of origin actually is. In Switzerland, the term Heimatort, or lieu d'origine in French, is extremely important since every Swiss citizen must have one. In addition to being a citizen of a canton of origin and the Swiss Confederation, everyone is a citizen of his or her place of origin and is entered in the family register of that place of origin. The place of origin is defined as the place where the family, usually the father, comes from, and should not be confused with the place of birth, although the place of origin could conceivably be the same as the place of birth. That is not necessarily the case. To complicate matters further, a Swiss citizen could even have more than one place of origin. In translating legal documents into English, Americanizing means taking into consideration that Switzerland and the US have entirely different legal systems. The Swiss embassy occasionally receives questions about legal matters involving American and Swiss citizens residing in the US or Switzerland. Translating the responses to such questions required an understanding of how certain issues pertaining to citizens of Switzerland and or the US are handled under Swiss and US laws. Therefore, it's essential to be aware of the differences between the Swiss civil law and US common law systems. Much of the legal translation work I did for the police liaison office involved translating letters of request, also called letters rogatory. These are sensitive and confidential documents usually issued by a Swiss court to a US court requesting judicial assistance in criminal investigations where there is cooperation between Switzerland and the US. The Federal Act on International Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters, or IMAC for short, is an excellent resource that provides the legal basis for such bilateral cooperation. It can be found on the Swiss government's online portal. Comparing the German, French, and English versions of bilateral agreements between Switzerland and the US is an excellent way of finding correct legal equivalents in the three languages. There are several highly recommended resources for translating Swiss legal documents into English. The US Department of State's Treaties in Force provides a listing of the treaties between the US and Switzerland, among other countries. The TIAS database, also available online from the US Department of State, contains some of the text of international agreements to which the US is a party, such as the English and German versions of the extradition treaty between the United States of America and Switzerland. The texts of treaties between Switzerland and the US, as well as other countries, can also be consulted online in German, French, and Italian from Das Portal der Schweizer Regierung. Since English is not an official language of Switzerland, there are no official English versions of Swiss laws. However, unofficial English translations of selected Swiss laws and ordinances from the Swiss Federal Council's classified compilation are available online in a variety of categories, including private law, criminal law, education, national defense, finance, public works, health, and technical cooperation. Editing English language publications on Switzerland with American target audiences in mind contributes to the Swiss government's public diplomacy efforts throughout the US. In the past few years, the Swiss government has focused increasingly on public diplomacy to introduce Americans to different aspects of Switzerland and Swiss culture. I participated in many of those efforts by editing English language publications on Switzerland on a wide variety of subjects, including On Track to the Future, Sustainable Transportation, a Challenge for the 21st Century, Modern Direct Democracy in Switzerland and the American West, Switzerland's Economic Footprint in the United States, Creating Jobs and Supporting the US Economy, and Earn While You Learn, Switzerland's Vocational Education and Training System, a model for apprenticeships in the United States. In addition, sharing Ambassador Martin Dahinden's passion for Swiss cuisine, I had the pleasure of translating his book, Beyond Muesli and Fondue, The Swiss Contribution to Culinary History. which tells the stories of colorful historical personalities, including Oscar of the Waldorf, Cesar Ritz, and the Delmonicos, the Swiss-Italian family that founded the original Delmonico's restaurant in New York City. In translating and editing press releases and official statements intended for the US media, it's essential to use accurate, precise, correct, and up-to-date terminology. In my job, I especially enjoyed translating press releases and Sprachregelungen, which are official statements by the Swiss government in response to inquiries by the news media. Since my translations were quoted by newspapers and online media such as the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, I had to ensure that they fully conveyed the meaning of the original Swiss German or Swiss French text, and that they were written in idiomatic American English. When I edited press releases in English translated in Baron, for example, I often had to change words and expressions from British English to American English. Sometimes I also had to correct terms that were old-fashioned and incorrect from the standpoint of diplomatic terminology. In one press release, I was amused to find the term Potentatengelder translated as potentates' assets, conjuring up visions of Oriental potentates from the tales from the 1001 Nights. So I changed the term to the more modern and accurate dictators' assets. When editing texts written by non-native speakers of English, Americanizing can involve correcting unintentionally humorous and potentially embarrassing errors that might be misunderstood and misinterpreted by an American reader or audience. In editing Swiss documents, I encountered some wonderful examples of unintended humor that would give American readers a hearty chuckle. In a draft of introductory remarks, I once came across, "Mr. X is one of the most wanted men at the National Science Foundation." Obviously, the author of the draft, a native speaker of Swiss German, had no idea that being one of the most wanted is not all that desirable in the US. In conclusion, an embassy translator must be a Renaissance person who is creative and adept at doing research and must be able to handle a wide variety of documents covering many different fields. Furthermore, an embassy translator must be familiar not only with the culture of the home country and that of the host country, but also with the diverse cultures within the home country. Through facilitating and smoothing the way for communication, an embassy translator serves as a vital link between cultures and countries and makes a valuable contribution toward carrying out a foreign embassy's mission in the US. Thank you for your attention.